We're going to be in Matthew 5, 6. And I know recently we have been, we did Matthew, was it 5, 5 not too long ago. And here we are again in another Beatitude. And this, it's a short verse, which all the Beatitudes are actually technically short. And like the rest of them, they are life-changing if you truly apply it and study it and really unpack what Jesus is talking about there. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And it says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Now that sounds simple, but if we really dig into this verse, it's incredibly deep. It speaks to something every single person in this Discord chat, or whoever watches this on YouTube, or anybody in general who reads this verse deals with, which is hunger. And I'm not talking about like physical hunger. All those, some of y'all might be thinking about, tomorrow night's dinner. I know I am. That's just who I am as a person. I'm always thinking about that next meal. One, because I love food. Two, you got to eat. My philosophy is once you eat, you kind of move on to the next task. I don't know if that's healthy, but that's just kind of what I do. But what I'm really talking about here is hunger of the soul. Because whether we realize it or not, all of us are hungry. All of us are thirsty. We are all searching for something to fill us, to satisfy us, and to make us whole. The problem is we tend to fill up on the wrong things. And that's our problems with the flesh. We hunger for the wrong things. Every human being has appetites. Some hunger for money. Others hunger for recognition. Some hunger for pleasure, entertainment, or comfort. And here's the tragedy. None of those things truly satisfy. They may give us a moment of happiness, that small little taste of satisfaction, but they always leave us empty again. I can attest to this personally. Let's talk, like, for instance, my military career. Chasing the next rank. I remember when I first got in, I wanted to be a sergeant, and I made sergeant, and I was like, man, I got responsibilities. It's just crazy. And I thought I would be happy. I wanted the next one, and then the next one. So think about it like this. It's like eating junk food, okay? No matter how much you eat, your body still craves real nourishment. Think about it. Why is it that people who seem to have it all are often the most miserable? Celebrities, athletes, millionaires. They chase success, fame, and possessions, and yet we see story after story of depression, broken marriages, addictions. Why? Because their souls are starving for something deeper. Now, I'm not saying that only rich folk suffer depression. I the same thing. I like to call it functional depression, where I could still go to work, I could still bathe and brush my teeth and take care of myself. But those tasks are exhausting. So it's not just the rich folk, it's all of us who suffer with that. And maybe it's just, being part of a broken world where mental illness is a thing, or because our souls are starving for something deeper. Jesus says the blessings belong to those who hunger and thirst, not for the things of this world, but for righteousness. Let's talk about King Solomon. Okay? King Solomon knew this truth all too well. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, which we've been kind of in our church here lately, and they dubbed it as the most depressing book of the Bible. And I was like, And then I started digging into it. I was like, man, this is really depressing. If you ever had the chance to read Ecclesiastes, you'll see what I'm talking about. But In Ecclesiastes, Solomon, he describes how he pursued pleasure, wisdom, wealth, and success. He built palaces, planted vineyards, collected treasures, surrounded himself with every indulgence imaginable. I think he had, I don't know, 300 something wives and 700 something concubines. I don't know. Don't quote me on the number, but that's a lot. One woman, it just drives me crazy, so I can't imagine 300 something wives and 700 concubines. But whatever, teach to own. But if anyone could say, I tried it all, it was Solomon. And what did he conclude? He said it was all vanity, meaningless, like chasing after the wind. And at the end of his life, Solomon boiled it down to this in Ecclesiastes chapter 12:13. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. In other words, life makes sense only when it's lived in reverence to God and obedience to his word. That's where real satisfaction is found. David understood this also being the father of Solomon. In Psalm 34:8, he says, taste to see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Yeah, that's an invitation from our Creator. God isn't saying, study me from a distance. He's saying, come and taste, experience my goodness for yourself. But here's the problem. We have this nasty habit of underestimating God's goodness. We think God is trying to keep joy from us, so we run to the world for pleasure. But the truth is, God is offering us something infinitely better. The world gives temporary satisfaction, like a fart in the wind. But God, he gives lasting fulfillment. And let me put this away, okay? I could go on for forever on this. But imagine someone who's been, back to junk food. I told you, I'm a foodie. Imagine someone who's been eating fast food their entire life. They think it's the best thing they've ever tasted. But then one day, they're invited to feast with fresh, rich, nourishing food. Maybe they're from the South. Oh, that soul food, some of that fried chicken and collard greens. Once they taste it, they realize I was settling for so much less. And that's what Psalm 34:8 is telling us. So stop settling for cheap substitutes. Taste and see the goodness of God. Paul in Ephesians, he takes it even deeper. Ephesians chapter 3, verses 18 and 19, he prays that believers would be able to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now, I don't know if you caught that, but filled with the fullness of God. I don't know about y'all, but I can't put a size, I can't put a tag on how big that is or how much that is. But that's what Jesus promised us in Matthew 5:6. That if we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we will be filled. Not with the emptiness of the world, but with the fullness of God's presence and his love. Now think about that. The creator of the universe wants to fill your life with his fullness. And yet, so often, we live on spiritual crumbs. Now let's take God's will and guidance and connect this to something practical. All right, many of us we underestimate God and his goodness, and many of us overcomplicate God's will. We ask questions like, what does God want me to do with my life? Which direction should I take? What's his plan for me? I'm guilty of all three of those things. I just be wanting to know. And sometimes, if you're like me, we paralyze ourselves with worry. But listen to God's promise in Psalm 32:8. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Right there, God is saying, don't overcomplicate this. Where are my overthinkers at? Hi, it's me. Walk with me is what God is saying. Walk with me, live by my word, hunger for righteousness, and I'll guide you. God's will is not a hidden puzzle. It's revealed as we walk in obedience. But we have to obey. And a lot of times we don't want to do that, but that's a conversation for another time. But when we fear God and obey his commands, when we hunger for righteousness, when we taste and see his goodness, his will unfolds before us step by step. Now, let's take where we started in Matthew and roll it up and bring all this together, okay? You might be lost and wondering, well, what does any of this do with Matthew 5:6? Well, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Solomon said, "Fear God and keep his commands, for this is the duty of all mankind." David said, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." Paul said, "Be filled with all the fullness of God." God himself said, "I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go." Do you see the theme here? Real life, real satisfaction, real blessing is found in him, in his word, in his presence, in his will. So let me ask you, as we wrap this up, what are you hungering for today? What's filling your soul right now? Are you hungry for recognition, for money, for pleasure, for control? Or are you hungry for righteousness, for God's presence, his word, his spirit in your life? The truth is, whatever you're hungering for will shape your life. If you hunger for the world, you'll always be empty. But if you hunger for righteousness, Jesus promises, you will be filled. So my challenge to you is to stop settling for substitutes. Stop chasing after what never satisfies. Taste and see that the Lord is good, and trust that his will is not complicated. We just make it complicated. It's simply about walking with him daily. So I ask for anybody who watches this, for anybody who needs to know the Lord, is to make us hungry for him. To give us a thirst for his righteousness. To fill us with his presence. And to lead us in his ways. I pray that we be satisfied in him alone. Because blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled.